So we're going to talk about cell reproduction. This entire unit is going to be about cell reproduction, except I'm going to introduce reproduction in general. So before we actually talk about how cells reproduce, I want to talk about reproduction of organisms first. There's two main types. Anybody know what the two types of reproduction are? Good. Asexual and?
Sexual.
Which one do you think is which?
The purple is a...
Good. The purple is asexual. We know that, or at least we assume, because in asexual, you're going to have one parent, and that one parent is going to produce offspring that look how compared to the parent? Identical. It's an exact replica copy of the parent cell, so, or the parent offspring. In this case, it's a cell showing you two cells, exact identical copies. But asexual reproduction can occur in cells because some organisms are single-celled organisms like bacteria. So this, let's say, would be a bacteria reproducing offspring that looks identical to the parent cell. If it is sexual reproduction, you start with two parents, you end up with one offspring, right? And what's the offspring going to be like?
Similar.
More, what's better than similar?
Like a lot. No, like
If you come from your mom and your dad,
mixed.
Awesome. It's a mixture because sometimes, which is our next unit, the similarities don't show up because one parent overpowers the other in terms of genetic makeup. So at the end of the day, you carry both of your parents' blueprint. What shows sometimes always doesn't justify that. Does that make sense? So now we move on to the reasons for, so cell reproduction, whole unit except that one slide, okay? Why do you think cells reproduce in your body or in any?
Because like some get sick. And then,
Good. They're going to replace cells that are sick, okay? Or malfunctioning. Believe it or not, your cells are programmed to kind of kill. What kills things in a cell?
Bacteria.
Well, in a cell, there's a part that takes worn out organelles or organelles that are not performing correctly and kills it. That's later. Lysosome.
I was just going to say that.
So lysosome will do the first line of defense. Then you've got your white blood cells, and then you've got everything else you guys were saying. But your cells are like a perfect little factory of organization. I can't even stress that enough. Except when something goes wrong, which is what we're going to learn happens a lot during the cell cycle, which, yes, leads to cancer, okay? Why else do cells reproduce? Why else do cells reproduce? So we reproduce to replace cells that die. They reproduce to allow for growth. You grow when your cells reproduce. And then what did we just talk about in the previous slide, and why do you think cells reproduce? Yes. They're preparing, so cells reproduce in preparation to be ready for sexual reproduction. So that is the reasons for cell reproduction, to replace cells that die, to allow for growth, and then some cells in your body literally reproduce to get ready to be fertilized, let's say, or be ready for reproduction. There's two ways cells reproduce, and it's really contingent on what type of cell you are. What are the types of cellular reproduction? And they both start with M.
Mitosis.
Good job. Mitosis and meiosis. And you could just uncover this. When mitosis occurs, look at what's happening. The parent cell replicates its DNA, and then the cell splits into two daughter cells. So you go from 1 to 2. So it's similar to asexual, right?
Wait, which one are we?
It's done for replacement and growth. So the reason mitosis occurs is to replace dead cells or to allow for growth. The parent cell makes two identical. Look, you've got 1, 2, 3 4 little sticks there. The daughter cells have the same exact thing. Okay? And it takes place in what's called somatic cells. So anybody know what somatic cells are? I'm going to leave that one blank then for a minute. Okay, so we know mitosis cells reproduce to replace dead cells, to allow for growth, and to form two identical daughter cells. Okay, we call them daughter cells because they just formed. Meiosis occurs when we're preparing to form a new organism. Those cells actually will produce how many? 4. So the parent cell splits, and then it splits again, producing 4. And what does the offspring look like in comparison to the parent?
Mixture.
No, look. No. How?
It has less.
It literally tells you right there.
Half of the number of chromosomes.
It has half of the original parent's genetic makeup.
That's what it says. It has less things.
Not less thingies, half. If it's less than half or more than half, there's a problem. Okay, so it has to be half because the number of chromosomes that each organism has makes them that specific organism. So when you, as an individual, are producing or undergoing meiosis, you're producing cells that are going to get ready for fertilization. So what kind of cells are those? What kind of cells go through fertilization? Sperm cells and egg cells. We call those gamete cells or sex cells. So gametes, you're going to want to write that down, are sperm or egg. Sperm or egg. Okay? So what do you think undergoes mitosis? If you're not a sex cell, what are you? No.
A single.
Body cells. Every other cell in your body is a somatic cell other than your sex cells. Every cell in your body replicates through mitosis and delivers an exact replica of the original cell. Meiosis is the only one that does it differently, or sex cell. All right, so, and let me clarify. We're going to focus on mitosis for this test, but you have to know these facts about meiosis. Mitosis produces 2 identical daughter cells. Meiosis produces 4 with half the number of chromosomes. Mitosis occurs in body cells, which are called somatic cells. Meiosis occurs in sex cells. Okay? Yes. Gametes are sperm cells and egg cells, which are considered the sex cells of your body. All right, they're like 3 different vocabulary words, right? All right, so let's learn how this happens, okay? Mitosis is how the cell divides, but your cell has to go through a cycle before it divides. This is called the cell cycle. Please keep that in mind. Mitosis is the division of nucleus, and I'm going to just put that out, the division of your nucleus. But the cell, in order to go through that division, has to go through a cycle. You see how I put a little circle for you? This is the cycle. Now, looking at this cycle, what do you think is one part of the cycle?
What do you mean part of the cycle?
Interphase. Good job. Interphase is the part of the cycle where the cell is preparing for division. It's saying, okay, we're going to do the following things before I split you, okay? And it is, look at this graph in comparison. Interphase takes the longest. So you go through this whole process of interphase and then bam, bam, the cell divides, okay? Division includes mitosis and what else? Look at the diagram. Cytokinesis, which is the division of the cytoplasm. Who could remind me what's the cytoplasm for? Or what is it like?
Cytoplasm is to hold the organelles in place.
It holds all my organelles in place and it surrounds the entire cell and it's like a jelly, okay? So when that finally splits, that's when the cell goes, okay? And I'm going to show you each one of those phases and what happens in each. Interphase has 3 parts. The first part, and if I go back here and I look at this cycle, here's interphase. The first part is G1. It's also a pretty long I mean, in comparison, it's almost half of the other two. G is the first part of interphase, and G signifies, what do you think is happening here? Look at what's happening. There's no splitting. This is the cell. This is the same cell. It's growing. G for growth. The most growth of the cell happens during the G1 phase. Why do you think a cell would grow?
Yes, because like if you get bigger, so it can,
Why are you getting bigger? Why would a cell get bigger?
for more information.
Nope. What did we learn about the mitochondria in your body, in your cells? What can it do? It's the powerhouse. Remember that they can make new mitochondria? So when organelles make new organelles within the cell, they need more room, yes? Okay, if a cell only can fit one mitochondria and all of a sudden there's 6, the cell will grow. It also is going to grow almost double in size because it's preparing for division. Yes. The second part of the cells of the interphase is S, which is the synthesizing phase. What does it mean to synthesize? To make. Write that down. Synthesize means to make, is made. What's being made here? What do you see? Anybody recognize this structure? Good. This is where DNA is made or replicated, which we're going to learn about that later. And chromosomes will become double. They're getting ready to form 2 daughter cells. And then you have G2. G stands for more growth, not the major growth, because the major growth happens during G1. And then the cell has all these little checkpoints throughout interphase to make sure there's no errors. Errors lead to problems during division, so the checkpoints are critical components of a perfect interphase.